Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a scalpel to one of the most persistent and frustrating health paradoxes of our time. You're eating clean, you're exercising consistently, and you still feel, well, profoundly unwell. Our mission is to integrate your shared sources into one powerful insight, the overlooked third pillar of health.
It's the realization that, every practicing clinician eventually has to face. For decades, the entire health paradigm was built on just two pillars: diet and exercise.
Right, the classics.
And they're absolutely critical, but they're incomplete. I vividly recall a patient, a high-achieving CEO, who had optimized everything. I mean, from sleep hygiene to specialized training. And yet, she was battling chronic weight gain and inflammation.
So she was doing everything right.
Everything. And when we finally drilled down, we found she had these massive ongoing environmental exposures. Without addressing that third pillar, none of her optimization mattered.
Okay, let's unpack the silent intruder, the environment. And we're not just talking about, pollution outside. This is about that micro world of complex illnesses that seems to be gaining visibility. Things like mold, heavy metals, Lyme, parasites. The central tension here is, are we seeing more cases, or is our ability to detect them finally catching up?
The answer is absolutely both. On one hand, the sheer load of man-made materials and chemicals in our atmosphere and our food supply, our homes, it's higher than ever.
Microplastic.
Look no further than microplastics, which are now completely pervasive. And at the same time, medicine is slowly starting to acknowledge that these issues are real, but our conventional detection tools are. Well, they're still lagging significantly behind the problem.
And that gap between what a patient is feeling and what medicine can detect, that creates this profound frustration. You're dealing with these non-specific debilitating symptoms: chronic fatigue, widespread muscle aches or myalgias, joint pain, and inability to recover from a workout or that debilitating brain fog. But then your standard blood panels, thyroid, testosterone, basic stuff, they come back completely clear. You're told you're fine, but you know you're operating at 50%.
That's the classic disconnect. Standard blood tests are essential. They cover the big things like diabetes or thyroid disease.
Yeah.
But they entirely miss the subtle environmental influences that don't cause an acute illness, but completely derail the way you feel, the clarity of your thought, and how you genuinely show up in your life.
So the flags are those non-specific symptoms, which, when you put them all together, they point towards something external acting on the system. The extreme example you shared was that former special operator, a Navy SEAL. By all objective measures, he was in peak physical condition.
Oh, he was the definition of optimized. Perfect diet, elite performance, everything. But he felt terrible. And his blood work showed these persistent, weird, non-specific markers, particularly liver enzyme elevations that just didn't make sense.
So something was off, but nobody knew what.
Exactly. It took immense diagnostic effort to realize he'd contracted schistosomiasis.
What?
It's an obscure parasite. They call it snail fever, that he picked up swimming in some isolated river during his career. It's an illness you'd expect to see in, a developing region, not in an elite American athlete. It just proves that even the most robust human systems can be undermined by an invisible environmental hit.
And because the injury is invisible and the symptoms are so vague, the psychological cost for that patient is just enormous.
It is.
They're often dismissed. I mean, the symptoms are real, but they're viewed through this lens of like a new hysteria where environmental illness is just misunderstood or minimized.
Exactly. When patient after patient is told your labs are normal, they start to internalize that. They just concede a lower standard of cognition and energy, thinking, oh, it's just stress or part of aging, when the reality is an entirely treatable environmental root cause is stressing their core biology.
Let's focus in on parasites for a minute, because that's one of these threats that is far more prevalent than most people realize. If you leave them untreated, what's the long-term consequence?
The consequences can range from just chronic malaise to outright organ damage. Infections like that schistosomiasis or entamoeba can cause severe liver damage over time. But even the more common infections, hookworm, whipworm, roundworm, they're a leading global cause of iron deficiency anemia.
How does that happen?
It happens through chronic, slow, microscopic blood loss in the gut. It often goes unnoticed for years until the fatigue is just crushing.
Okay, this detail on sources and transmission is vital. Where are we picking these things up, besides obscure rivers?
Food is a major vector, and this is a crucial detail. I recommend extreme The risk of contracting specific flukes or worms from raw seafood is high. If you consume raw beef or pork, you face risks of things like tapeworms.
So cooking is the key.
Cooking the food thoroughly eliminates the risk. We just have to preach caution.
And the transmission isn't always external, right? It can be cyclical, inside the home.
That's right. Parasites are not isolated problems. A symptomatic partner can cyclically transmit the infection to an asymptomatic partner.
Oh.
Common surfaces, the toilet, the bath, shared sheets. You might clear your own infection, but if you have an undiagnosed partner, you're just constantly being reinfected. So testing and treating the partner, even if they show no symptoms, often becomes necessary.
And then there are our beloved pets.
A very common vector. Dogs carry things like Giardia and various worms.
So when the dog licks your face.
When a dog licks your face, sleeps in your bed, sheds biological material on the floor, you risk transmission. The practical hierarchy for tackling this is usually treat the dog first, treat the partner second, and then treat yourself.
Given how common this is, why aren't our gold standard diagnostics catching them? I mean, we're talking about highly sensitive TCR stool testing.
The disconnect lies in where the parasite is hiding and the difficulty of sampling. So standard PCR tests, they claim near 100% sensitivity. But we see patient after patient with all the clinical symptoms who test negative, sometimes multiple times.
So the test says they're fine, but they're clearly not.
Right. And we found that when these patients are sent to specialized labs for old-school microscopy, where a technician is literally searching the sample under a slide, they often find the worms and eggs.
So the low-tech way is actually better sometimes.
In these cases, yes. The modern test can suffer from sampling errors, or maybe the parasite is in a life cycle stage that evades the PCR's detection window. So that old-school method often proves more reliable when the clinical picture is strong.
Okay, so that's parasites. Let's transition to mold, where the controversy starts even earlier because of, well, a significant diagnostic uncertainty.
Mold exposure is a real challenge. We lack the standardized criteria that define other diseases. The American College of Medical Toxicologists, for example, notes that unlike diagnosing diabetes with a glucose level, there isn't a universally accepted diagnostic criteria for mold toxicity.
So there's a huge debate in the medical community.
A massive disconnect. Traditional environmental medicine often opposes advanced tools like urinary mycotoxin testing, while other physicians are using these exact protocols and seeing remarkable patient improvement.
So why the controversy? Is it the toxin itself or how we're measuring it?
It's both. We are measuring the body's reaction to the mold's toxic byproducts, called mycotoxins. But the establishment hasn't agreed on which mycotoxins matter most, or what constitutes a toxic dose.
Which makes it easy to dismiss.
It makes it very easy for conventional systems to dismiss it. But the clinical symptoms are just undeniable. Severe brain fog, persistent headaches, profound fatigue, rashes, chronic congestion, even neurocognitive deficits.
And the environments we live in, especially in the U.S., almost seem designed for it.
Unfortunately, yes. Countries that rely heavily on timber construction are highly susceptible, especially when you combine that with hot and wet climates. Water ingress, a leaky roof, bad ventilation, a plumbing failure. It creates the perfect damp organic environment for aggressive mold growth.
And it's often a genetic sensitivity that determines who actually gets sick.
That is the crucial variable. You can have 10 people living in the same severely contaminated home, and maybe only 3 or 4 will experience major systemic illness.
Why is that?
It's tied to specific human leukocyte antigen, or HLA, genes. I experienced this myself. I got severely sick with my son, but my husband and daughter were completely fine. Their systems processed the toxins, ours didn't.
This inherent vulnerability, it ties back to this idea of compounding exposures. We saw this with the case of Evie Pumperis, the former Secret Service agent.
Right. Evie had an acute, high-dose environmental hit from her time at Ground Zero after 9/11. That gave her a heavy initial body burden. So when you combine that acute event with a chronic, low-level exposure like mold in her later residence, the entire immune system is pushed past the tipping point.
The acute exposure primed her.
And the chronic exposure finally broke the system. Illness is often not one big hit. It's the accumulation of things that stresses the immune system beyond its ability to recover.
So let's connect the dots. We have these external threats. Parasites, mold, metals. How do they interact with our internal environment? The common denominator always seems to be the gut.
The gut is ground zero. It's the largest barrier between you and the outside world. And when we talk about external stressors impacting internal health, the central mechanism is often gut permeability or leaky gut.
Can you define that really clearly for us?
Simply put, the cells lining your intestine are held together by tight junctions. When the gut is healthy, These junctions are sealed tight. They control what gets into your bloodstream. But when you're exposed to environmental toxins or stress or chronic infection, those junctions loosen. That's permeability. Large particles, undigested food, toxins, they leak into the bloodstream, triggering systemic inflammation.
And it compromises nutrient absorption even if you're eating well.
Exactly, even if you're eating the perfect organic salad.
And inside the gut, we also frequently encounter H. pylori. What's the relationship there?
H. pylori is extremely common and often completely asymptomatic. It just exists benignly in the stomach. However, it is fundamentally an inflammatory agent.
So it's always causing some low-level stress.
Yes, it's notorious for being linked to chronic, persistent reflux or heartburn. And because it's passed through saliva-sharing drinks, kissing it spreads easily. More seriously, long-term inflammation from H. pylori is a known risk factor for specific gastric cancers, which is why conventional antibiotic treatment is usually required.
And layering on top of that, we have heavy metals and VOCCs. Let's spend a minute on those chemical threats.
These are silent, insidious problems.
Yeah.
Heavy metals like mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium, they're everywhere.
And the sources are common things.
Very common. Lead from old piping and house paint, mercury from large fish like tuna or swordfish, even old dental amalgams. And these metals are lipophilic, meaning they're fat-loving. They readily cross the blood-brain barrier, affecting both fertility and neurocognitive function.
Okay, and the VOCCs?
VOCCs are volatile organic compounds. These are gases emitted from things like paint, cleaning supplies, new furniture, carpets.
So new car smell.
That's a perfect example. They're a massive problem in new or recently renovated spaces. We had that one patient with unlimited resources who kept getting sick. We traced it back to VOCC exposure every time she stayed in a new, high-end hotel. The ventilation was just blowing off paint and solvent fumes from recent renovations. She'd detox, feel great, and then get re-exposed every few weeks.
Which just perfectly illustrates the compounding stress. You're never fighting just one battle.
Precisely. Illness is almost always multifactorial. You're carrying a 5% load from old paint in your childhood home, 20% from a moldy college apartment, 10% from H. pylori, another 15% from a mercury filling. That cumulative stress eventually just pushes the immune system past this breaking point.
So if a listener recognizes these issues, if they're that former special operator or the stressed CEO, what are the core modalities that usually have a positive impact? What's the action plan?
Number one, the absolute foundation. Removal of exposure. You cannot heal in a sick environment. If your home has water damage and mold, you must address it or move. It's non-negotiable.
Once that source is gone, how do you start cleaning up the body?
The single best supported modality is the sauna protocol. We're targeting those lipophilic chemicals, the heavy metals, mycotoxins, chemical residues that are stored in the body's fat tissue.
So you're literally sweating it out.
You are. Heat, whether from a traditional or an infrared sauna, is incredibly effective at mobilizing these fat-soluble toxins and excreting them through the skin. A typical protocol is 30 to 60 minutes at temperatures from, say, 113 to 176 Fahrenheit.
And to capture those toxins internally.
Then we use binders. Things like activated charcoal, bentonite clay, or even prescription binders like cholestyramine. They act like sponges in the gut, grabbing onto mobilized toxins so they can be eliminated instead of reabsorbed.
You mentioned the patient who becomes a medical nomad, going from doctor to doctor because their problem doesn't fit a standard algorithm. How does someone find the right help?
This is the hardest part. Standard medicine is built for linear problems. Symptom A, test B, treatment C. Complex environmental illness requires systems biology. It requires a team sport led by a quarterback physician, often a functional or systems-oriented practitioner who manages a core group of specialists.
So you have to look outside the traditional network sometimes.
Often you do. You need clinicians who look beyond single organ systems.
So how does medicine move forward? How does it stop dismissing this as spurious science?
Yeah, it requires unification. Physicians, scientists, researchers, they have to collaborate to study these emerging issues instead of denying them because they don't fit current textbooks. We've seen this before. I mean, look at the link between certain pesticides and Parkinson's disease. Decades ago, that was dismissed as anecdotal. Now the data is overwhelming.
So today's fringe science
is often tomorrow's proven critical link. Exactly.
And if we look 5 years down the road at biomarkers, where will our focus shift?
I believe we'll move beyond simple metrics like body fat percentage. I think the focus will shift toward analyzing the quality of muscle tissue, specifically the fat that infiltrates skeletal muscle. It's called intramuscular adipose tissue, or IMAT.
And why there?
The hypothesis is that these fat-soluble exposures, the mycotoxins, the heavy metals, might be embedded in the fat within our working muscle, not just around our organs. Analyzing IMAP might become a key indicator of total body burden. But the fundamental takeaway remains. If a patient is not feeling well, has all these vague symptoms, and their standard labs are negative, it just means we haven't looked hard enough. We're looking at the wrong set of inputs.
Which brings us to the final challenging question you raised, the one we haven't even begun to integrate into our health model, the influence of technology. We are now living immersed in non-ionizing radiation, cell phones, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi.
Right. The traditional data says non-ionizing radiation is safe because it doesn't cause immediate tissue damage, like, say, an X-ray. But we have to ask the question, are we foolish to believe that this constant, non-stop bath of electromagnetic fields has zero biological effect? Or is this the next major environmental stressor that we're simply not yet equipped to test, measure, or even understand in relation to long-term chronic illness?
So you might successfully move out of the moldy house, you might detox your metals and treat your parasites, but you are still living and sleeping next to a new type of stressor your body never evolved to handle. That's the thought I want to leave you with, is the convenience of modern technology creating an environmental load we don't even have the tools to measure yet.